What's going on, guys? This is Philip Sessions, your public speaking coach, and I'm here with Bobbi Kahler. She is a podcaster, writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. Bobbi has coached more than 3,000 people in her career and has delivered presentations for tens of thousands of people. She helps people see new possibilities for themselves and for their lives. She has appeared in articles for Forbes, The Today Show, Yahoo News, Thrive Global, Authority Magazine, and Influencive. She is the author of Travels of the Heart, Developing Your Inner Leader, was a contributing author to the magazine or Amazon and New York Times best-selling book, Masters of Success. And she is the host of her podcast, Unyielded, Thriving No Matter What, which is about making your next chapter in life your best chapter. And Bobbi, it's been a long time coming to get you on the podcast, but I'm excited to talk with you today. But tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe from a personal perspective.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for having me back. So personally, I am married to my very, very best friend. We don't have kids, have a whole bunch of nieces and nephews. And last week I actually got to meet two of my great nephews, which is kind of weird. I'm one of the youngest in my family, and my sisters have had a lot of kids. But so that was really cool. I'm super active, as you know. Like, I love road cycling and I love cross country skiing. Basically, if I can be outside doing something fun, I'm a happy girl.
Yeah.
And I'm a dog mom of 3.
There you go. See, I was going to mention you're going to be you are a dog mom, and I was going to say they're going to start howling if you don't say anything about them. They'll get jealous. I know how they are. That's our little dog Dexter. He does it all the time. My wife and I, we may give each other a hug or a little kiss, and all of a sudden, boom, he's right there. He's between us. We can't show any affection without giving it to him.
So. Oh, that's right. And Jackson is right here at my feet. He tore his ACL back in March. In February. So he's 9 weeks past the surgery. So we have another almost 2 months to go. They take almost 4 months to heal after surgery. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a process. So that's a little bit.
Yeah, I bet that's a lot to deal with. Well, Bobbi, yeah, I'm glad to have you back on. I know it's been a while to get you on this one, but for those of you that don't understand why we're saying back on, if you've listened to all the episodes, I had a previous podcast called Healthy Living Sessions where we had Bobbi on. We talked a lot about fitness there, but I've made that transition to public speaking. So we'll be speaking about that instead. But I really wanted to dive into, when I was going through your bio and your intro here, you talked about you help people see new possibilities for themselves and for their lives. And I truly believe that when you can master the art of public speaking and communication, you can really change your life. So I'm going to open it up to very broad, literally to that, and ask you, what are your thoughts on how public speaking and communication can help transform your life?
Oh, my goodness.
I know I'm keeping it very broad there, but we'll start diving in after that.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So many things come to mind. So the first thing that comes to mind there, Philip, is, I don't know if you know this about me, but I grew up with really severe speech problems. I don't know if I ever shared that before or not.
No, you did not. I would have never guessed.
You didn't know me when I was a kid. When I was like 5 or 6, we had a speech therapist came into my school, and he evaluated me, and he told my mom, he's like, she has catastrophic speech problems. She'll never speak correctly. And so when I was in the 8th grade, as you can imagine, and he was right, I did have really bad speech problems, but I hated speaking in public. Like those days when you had to read in class, read a paragraph, those were terrible for me. So when I was in the 8th grade, I decided that I should take a public speaking class when I went to high school. And so the day of my very first speech, my teacher was Mr. Jordan. It was terrible. It was an absolute train wreck. I was so nervous. I talked so fast and blah, blah. And so at the end of the class, when the bell rang, Mr. Jordan, who happened to be the speech and debate teacher, he said, Bobbi, can you stick around after class for a minute? And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to tell me not to come back. I thought that's how bad I had done. And he said, he goes, have you ever thought about joining the debate team? And I'm like, did you hear that speech? It's like, that was a train wreck. And he just kind of smiled a little bit, and he's like, yeah, it wasn't very good. But he said, you have potential. And he said, with your work ethic, your potential, and my coaching, you could be successful at this. So it took a while, but I ended up joining the team. I ended up winning some tournaments. But that experience changed my life. Because I think that if you've got an idea, and it doesn't even have to be on a big stage, right? I mean, I've spoken on big stages before, but think about it, even from meetings to small groups, whatever that is, if you're trying to convey your idea, think about how much easier that is when you are comfortable in expressing yourself. Because I think with speaking, and I'd love, because you're the one that teaches this, but so I'd love your thoughts. But I think sometimes it's having the idea, articulating the idea, which are certain set of skills, but then it's also being comfortable in delivering the message. I mean, so I think that there are several elements there, but that's kind of my take on that broad question.
Yeah, that is an amazing story. We have a lot to dive down, but to kind of answer your question there, I like that you break that in those 3 points. And that is so true. And I always like to focus on the comfortability first, because if you are not comfortable, you cannot get confidence in yourself. And therefore, it doesn't matter how much great information you give, how great you deliver that. If you're not confident and comfortable, people are going to be like, oh, I don't know about this Bobbi person. I don't know about Philip. They don't seem to know what they're really talking about, because something's going on there. It just feels off. You can't really explain it or put your finger on it, but that's what it feels like. So I would say the comfort is the first thing. And then, yes, that clarity and being able to convey that message is the next part. And that's a lot of clients that I work with, especially in the trades industry, that's where they struggle with, because there's all this knowledge up here. And really anybody, I've worked around engineers, and it's the same thing, that they have all this knowledge in their head. They may be comfortable to be able to share it because they know it so well that they can teach it, but they don't really know how exactly to share it. And so sometimes that is because they don't truly know it as well as they thought. But then a lot of times it's, how do I take this information at a high level and bring it down to almost this, like the books, whatever for dummies, speaking for dummies, we'll call it that. They don't know how to bring it down to an elementary level. And so that's the next part of helping people with speaking.
Yeah. I think related to that, I don't know who said it, but someone once said, experts see more. And in the coaching work I used to do, I would help managers learn how to coach their team. So, and it was primarily in sales. And so one of the things I always talked to them about was, if you watch someone who's really, really good in sales, it's like they're just in the flow. It's intuitive. Right. So what I would always say to them is, you have to learn how to break down your expertise. And that can be hard, because I love home improvement projects, right? I love painting. I'm going to paint later on today, as a matter of fact. But I've been doing that for a long time. So if you say, Bobbi, let's paint the room, I know what that means, right? We're going to take everything off the wall. We're going to spackle the holes. We're going to sand it down. We're going to wipe the walls down. We're going to clean them, all this kind of stuff. But if you say to someone who's never painted a room before, go paint the room, they're going to go put paint on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's not going to turn out as well.
Maybe.
That's right. Maybe they will. Hopefully they will. But they're probably not going to spackle. They're not going to clean it. They're not going to sand. It's not going to look as good. And it's what you're talking about there. Breaking down your own expertise is it's hard to do, because you have to learn, as we become really, really good at something, we start to chunk it together. So we have to learn how to unchunk that if we're going to teach it, or if we're going to explain it to somebody else.
Yeah, and I've heard before kind of a different way to say this. So with standard operating procedures, SOPs, a lot of times when you're doing the job, you go through, oh yeah, we need to do this and this and this and this, and it's like 4 steps, and then somebody's like, I can't follow that. What did you do from here to here? It's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I have to go here and do this and all these things first to get to that next point. But I just know to do it.
That's right.
It is difficult to break that back down.
It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard another story about, like, hey, this man, I think he was an engineer, like, hey, he had his kid make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but write down the SOP for that. So how do you do that? Oh, you just go get bread, get jelly, peanut butter, and you put it on there. What do you use to put it on there? How do you open up the jar? Where do you get the jar from? All this stuff. It's like, oh, I never thought about those things. It's just, that's where you go. So that assumed knowledge is something that will get us every single time. And we know what assumed stands for.
Yep. That's right. Don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to go back because you talked about this teacher. And I think that is a really good point. And why I love speaking in front of people is because I can help them out. But they
Mhm.
saw this possibility in you and they
Mhm.
encouraged you, maybe told you, I don't know exactly the whole story there, but they talked with you about that and encouraged you, even though you were in your not exactly in your words, but horrendous in that moment, they still saw something in you and they spoke into you. Talk a little bit about that and give us an example or a story that you've actually had that same thing where you've been able to do that for somebody else.
Oh my goodness. But you're absolutely right. Mr. Jordan definitely saw something in me. Um, and I'm not even sure exactly what it was, other than he said, you have a presence. He's
Mm,
like, when you stepped to the front of the room, he said, people leaned in. They wanted to listen. And even though this is odd, even though I was petrified that day, I was also confident that what I had to say was important. And I think that's an interesting distinction because, like, I was scared to death of being in front of the room, but I was confident that what I had to say was important.
mm,
And way, way, way back in the day when I was part of the National Speakers Association, I used to mentor the upcoming speakers. And that's what I'd always tell them, like, you know, you have to believe that if you're stepping on that stage, there's something that you have to share that is worth hearing.
yes.
Because that's what's so important. You're there for a reason. You're not there for yourself. You're there for them.
Mm,
Um, in terms of when I've done that for someone else, one of the times that stands out to me is well, God, it happens a lot in coaching because I think in coaching you're always holding up that mirror. Um, but I remember there was this one gal. She was down in Texas and she was in sales. And she was just like, I don't know if I can be good at this. I don't know if I can be good at this. But she had all of the ingredients. Like when you met this person, you wanted to talk to her. You know what I
mm.
mean? Like, and just she was a good listener. She had all the skills. And what she was missing was like this the link to between being able to listen to someone, have a conversation, and then say, here's how I can help you. Because the here's how I can help you part made her feel like she was being pushy. And it's
Mm.
like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. That's not pushy. If you know you can help someone, then you're just saying, here's how I can help you if you want the help. And so her name was Madeline. So that was the one that kind of jumped in my head first. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that's what you're looking for.
No, I think that's great. And it's ironic that you share that story because that's a lot of how I feel things are. I can be a great
Mm.
listener most of the time. If you ask my wife, it might be she might say something else. But a lot of people tell me I am a great listener. They feel like they can talk with me, but I do feel pushy as well whenever I go to
Mm.
ask for the sell, even though it's really more of, hey, I've got this service. I can help you with that if you want that help. But it does still feel pushy. So it's ironic that you mentioned that story. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up.
Yeah. Here's the thing about it. This is what someone told me years ago, and this is what I taught. When you get to that, because I taught sales for 14 years, 15 years, a long time. When you get to that part, you're just letting the other person know, hey, it seems like I can help you, right? It seems like there's a fit.
Mhm.
And if you want to go forward, this is what it looks like,
Yeah.
and then what do you think? That's the thing I always hated with say, like, so when I was teaching sales, this is kind of funny. If I'd go to, like, let's say a party or something and someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I teach sales," and turn and walk away. No one on it because it's like, "Oh no, it's snake oil." No, no, no. And it's at its highest level, sales is really great service.
Yeah.
We were talking before we hit the record button about how so many times people don't even answer the phone, right? If people want to work with you, it's our job to let them know how. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And so I want you to finish up that story because you talked about how you told her that you were kind of that mirror for her. But how did
Mhm.
that change her once you spoke into her about that?
So at first she was very nervous because if you think, oh man, I'm being pushy,
Mhm.
that's a hard barrier. And I said, listen, are you willing to test it? And that's really important Because if you ask someone to change, that can be very difficult. But if you say, are you willing to test it? Most people are like, yeah, I'll give it a try. And when I say test it, I mean like a real try. Like you can't try it once and be like, oh my God, it didn't work. You got to try it like, 5 times, let's say. And she agreed. I think she agreed to 7 times. She's going to try it with her next on her next 7 conversations with a client, with a prospect. And I said, all I want you to do is try it and test it, see how you feel, and then make a note of that and make a note of how did they respond. And she agreed to 7 times, but later when we talked about it, she said after the first time, she said, I still felt a little bit nervous, but she said they were grateful. And she said that started to switch things for her, because she's like, they wanted my help.
Yeah.
And she said that made me feel good. Like I'm not pushing anything on them. And out of the 7 times, I think maybe 2 were no's. They're like, but they both said, hey, you know what? I appreciate you. I appreciate your offer. I just don't think it's the right time for me yet. And she's like, you know what? I live to tell about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. You didn't
die.
die.
I didn't die. The thing I was afraid of happened and I didn't die.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that you were able to speak that into her and show her that possibility for her to be able to go forward and obviously start making a career in sales. Because if you're not selling in sales, it's kind of hard to make a career out of that. But I do want to I'm going to go back here to this teacher. So they spoke this possibility into you. You went to debate, and we'll fast forward from that. But now we see, and going back to your bio again, all of a sudden you're on Forbes, you're on the Today Show, you're on Yahoo News, all of this stuff, which is all these big time news outlets, if you will. And it all started from you being a mess when it came to speaking. You didn't believe in yourself. Somebody saw a possibility in you and spoke that into you. And so you had this journey. So tell us a little bit about this journey, because a lot of our audience are kind of at this point, maybe they're a little bit further than you were back there in 8th grade or high school, whenever you did this first speech, but they're still at that point where like, I'm just not sure if I'm ready for that. So what was this journey like for you to be able to get to these big news outlets and be on those? And of course, being this coach that's speaking into people all the time.
Yeah. So part of my story is I did not go to college right after high school. My parents didn't believe in it. And they weren't going to pay for it.
That was a really big shock, especially with the age that you're at and your parents and everything. That was definitely something that shoved down your throat.
Oh my God. Everyone else.
Yeah.
I actually had to fight with my mom to stay in high school, Philip.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's how much they didn't believe in formal education. So I went to work right away, and I was one of those people. I started at Wendy's in management, fast food management, which was tough at 18 to be managing people either my age or significantly older.
Yeah.
But I developed, and then I went on to McDonald's, and I developed a reputation for being like when a store had bad morale, I could turn the store around. And so that was part of my thing. And, so you're communicating with people all the time, but that's not speaking. And then eventually I went back to college, or I went to college, I should say. I found a way to pay for it myself. And then I was working at a mid-size law firm in Chicago, and I started doing all their training and development, and I loved it. And, still going through to college. And at a point I thought, okay, I love the training. I want to go on to something bigger. And so I went to the head of the law firm. His name was Barry. And I said, I've been here for 8 years. I've loved every minute, and I'm going to start my own business. And he's like, I knew this day would come. And he said, I completely support you. Wow. And they became my very first client, because they hired me to come back and still do their training, which was really cool. That's a great way to start a business. I mean, I was lucky. And they're like, how much are you going to charge us? And I asked for a number I didn't think they'd ever give me, and they did. And I'm like, oh man, okay, that's good. So then from there, in 2001, my husband now, he was boyfriend then, we moved from Chicago to Portland, Oregon. And we're going to start, the business out there. And then September 11th happened. We moved there in late August. So then the economy tanked in Portland. We're like, oh, there goes all of our plans. But we made the commitment to start the business. So I started getting as many free speaking engagements around Portland as I could, because that's a great way to find clients. And I was terrified at first. I remember that it was a Chamber of Commerce event. It was a good sized chamber. It was a very popular one. And I was so nervous beforehand. But I did my presentation and I realized how much I loved speaking. Like it really took me back to when I was competing in it. And from there, I just kept getting as many free speaking events as I could. But every time I got one free speaking event and I delivered a presentation, I was immediately booked for another one, or I'd pick up clients. Or pretty soon people were like, hey, we have this event going on. How much do you charge? I'm like, yes, finally, someone is
Nice.
willing to pay me for this. And that's how it all started. But I completely fell in love with it again, and it started because it was like, well, it was necessary for the business. And that's what I did.
Mm.
And that's how it all started.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And there at the end, I think is such an important point, especially for those of us that really grew up on technology, grew up with social media, and how we see, and at least I see in the groups I'm around, it's always like, oh, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. Oh, you don't do this unless you get paid. And it's interesting that you're like, I started for free. I did it
Mm-hmm.
for free. Every time I did a free event, I ended up getting a client, which was obviously paying you, or I got
That's
paid to
right.
go speak on another stage. So I just kept doing free events and I get paid events because that's the thing that is kind of shoved down our throats as well. Or again, what I've
Mm-hmm.
seen is that, oh, don't do free or do it a couple of times until you start getting paid and then don't do it again because then you're discounting your value kind of thing, which is really kind of counterintuitive to me because if you're not getting in front of people, what best way to get in front of people besides just trying to do something for free? I get it. Don't do it forever and ever and ever. But if you have nothing, go do it for free. So
That's
what
right.
made you decide to do it for free and not try and charge or anything?
At the time, I don't even know if I knew that people got paid for it.
Yeah.
Really and truly. But it was there are so many at the time, I don't know if it's still this way, but there were so many networking groups around town. And I just thought,
Mhm.
I want to be in front of these audiences. And I
Mm.
also think about you can be creative in the way that you get paid. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
money's always great. But many of these places had newsletters that they sent out to the membership, or some of them had magazines. And I'd say, hey, in lieu of payment, can I have an article? Can I put an article in your newsletter or in your magazine? And most of them are looking for content. Now, did I get paid for that? No, but it got me more exposure. Exposure
Yeah.
is a form of payment. And now
Mhm.
something I did not do very well at the time, and I wish I would have been better at it, from the beginning, is another way that you can get paid is, paid in quotes here, if you're thinking creatively, is you want to be building your email list, right? Because if you're going to have offerings, if you're going to have courses, coaching, whatever that might be, a way to stay in touch with people, that is a form of payment if you're really being creative. I mean, if you think about it that way, like I was listening to Pat Flynn. He was talking, and Pat Flynn is a genius in this kind of stuff, and he's like, your list is gold.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have a list, how are you in front of people? Like, that's how you start to create your raving fans. And like
Mhm.
Pat has tons and tons and tons of courses, and he's like, that's what it's all about. So to me, number one, I didn't know that you could be paid for it originally, but then I think of it very creatively. And the other thing is, I would always ask for, like, will you give me a recommendation? And I'd always ask for referrals. And sometimes, I mean, they were always pleased. Why wouldn't they want to give me a recommendation or a referral? So I think about it a little bit more out of the box when you think about payment.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. Rather than this only doing it free, only going and speak, like, hey, I'll do that, but do this for me. Would you be willing to do this? And that is a great way. And you're exactly right. They're always looking for articles. And the
Yep.
great thing about having them write an article up about you, or even if you write it up, but it's on their page, their channel, whatever,
Yeah.
is that now it's that third party validation. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to see somebody else talk about you, especially those that don't know you at all. If somebody else is talking about you, that helps them realize that you have more credibility, especially with social media today. We can talk about how great we are all the time, how we've helped this client out, how we spoke there, how we did this, that, and the other. But until somebody else starts saying it, it's kind of hard to believe it or not.
That's right. And the other thing about it is, when I was starting, I went to I can't remember how early this was, but let's say within the first year or so, I went to one of the NSA events, the National Speakers Association events, and whoever was speaking, I don't remember who it was, they said, when you're getting started, just know that your first 100 speeches aren't going to be great. So get the first 100 over as fast as you can. It was like, and I thought, it's one thing to practice, in my studio and all this kind of stuff. It is another thing to be in front of a group. And I don't care if it's 5 people or 15 people, 50 people, whatever that is. So those free events, that was a way for me to practice and hone my skill. And then, I've been, facilitating and speaking now for 20 plus years. And someone said to me recently, they're like, God, does anything ever throw you? Because you get there and the PowerPoint doesn't work or this doesn't work. I mean, when you do this enough, you've seen so many things that can go wrong. It's like, no big deal. Yeah. And that's kind of what I said. I'm like, I've experienced so many things that didn't go the way they were supposed to, like, with technology or whatever. But that's one of the advantages of getting out there and being in front of people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that is a great point. And really on that point, I want to ask you, and you kind of answered it a little bit, but let's say maybe you're a little too afraid to get on stages or get in front of people. What are some good ways to knock out that 100 stages without necessarily being on stages? Maybe you need a little bit like 50 stages before that or 50 practices before you go get on stage. So what are some things in your mind that we can do to practice before going on to the stage?
Well, and when you say stage, how big do you mean?
So I'm just saying, like in general, like where before you go out physically in front of an audience, what are some things that you think could help us be able to get better at our speaking?
I mean, a lot of people always say speak in front of a mirror, and that freaks me out. So I don't believe in that. I don't know. It's like I can't look at myself. You can record yourself, and it's really easy to do now. I would always practice, and I would really imagine. I didn't just practice saying the words. When I practiced, I would think about, I would visualize the audience. And this came from one of my teachers in high school, not Mr. Jordan, but Miss Todd. She was also one of the coaches. And the reason this came up is I was asked to be in the Miss Teen Missouri pageant. It was an academic distinction back then. And I wasn't going to do it, but they had a speech competition. And my mom's like, wow, a girl's speech promise. If you go, you win the speech competition. How would that feel? And I'm like, that'd be awesome. So Miss Todd helped me, and she arranged for me to be able to use the auditorium when it was empty. Mm-hmm. And she said, you have to visualize the audience out here. And she said, so when you're practicing your speech and you're delivering your speech, you practice as though you're seeing people in the seats. And she even arranged, like, they had the spotlight thing, and she even arranged that for me. Not everyone's going to have that opportunity, but that was great because she's like, you have to know what that's like when that light hits you. And so it was not just practicing, like, I'm going to say the words over and over and over again. It's not just memorizing it. It's imagining the full experience. And when I used to coach people, back when I mentored them, most people have the most trouble in the Q&A session, the part of the presentation. If you're going to have Q&A, because you're part of the speech, you can memorize the speech, you have your PowerPoint or whatever you have. That's kind of the easier part. Like, you should know that part. Yeah. The Q&A portion, that's where it's like, oh man, I don't know what they're going to ask me. And so I'd say, imagine, if you're really imagining yourself in this setting and you have a good handle on who this group is, then what questions do you think someone in this group, what questions do you think they'll have? And then practice your responses to that. So the practice piece was really important. And it wasn't just like, am I saying it correctly? What are my hand gestures doing? It was imagining the whole experience. And I think also what's really important about that is knowing, really connecting with, why are you there? Why did they want you to come speak in the first place? It's for a reason. And when we connect with that reason, everything becomes easier. So does that help?
No, that was great. That was definitely great. Yes, visualization is such an important thing. And I know I've talked with past clients about the fact that they're like, oh, I'm getting ready to go on stage. And one of the things I make sure, especially if it's their first stage, like, hey, that light's going to be in your eyes. You
That's
still have
right.
to look in that crowd and act like you're looking at people. You have to guess where their eyes are at, but don't look all the way at the back. Like, oh, I'm just going to look at the back and simulate eye contact. Like, no,
Mm-mm.
you need to be looking at the seats. And yes, that light's going to be right on you. So you're not really going to see anybody but maybe that first row, but
Yep.
try and look out at other rows as well to simulate that eye contact. But yeah, trying any way that you can to visualize that. I think it's such a great thing to do there. And you mentioned about, using your hands and everything and not just literally what you're saying. And then also remembering that what you're there for and why they want you
Yeah.
there. That's something I talk about all the time to really help you get out of your own head and be more confident is that remember, it's not about you. It's about your audience. They have you there for a reason. You're sharing a message, and that's what they're there to hear. But you just happen to be the person that can share that message. So that's why you're there. So it's not necessarily about you, although it is a little bit about you because you share that certain message. You have that background, the stories that can help relate to that audience. So there's
That's
some
right.
great things. I also like to take one step back from that too, and always say a lot, especially if you're just super nervous, you've never really spoken before, using social media. So getting your phone out and taking videos, whether you record them
That's
or
right.
post them on social media, just start. Because I look at
Ooh.
videos from like 3 years ago, I'm like, oh, I was terrible, but I've been consistent at doing videos and I've consistently gotten better just from doing that alone. Of course, there's other stuff, but that definitely helps a lot.
Absolutely. Here's something that someone said to me early on. They said, when you go to an event and you know there's going to be a speaker, do you want the speaker to be good or are you cheering for the speaker to be terrible? Nobody's
Yeah.
cheering for the speaker to be terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are in your corner. And I think we forget that, like, oh God, everyone's going to hate me.
Mm.
No, they're cheering for you to be successful. And the other thing is, if you've got passion for what you're talking about, you can win anybody over. Like I remember one time it was a session at it was an entrepreneurial conference in Los Angeles, and it was the session after lunch, which is always a tough one, right? Because everyone's tired, they have too many carbs, everyone's falling asleep, whatever. And the guy, his name was William, and he spoke right after lunch, and he was an accountant. And I'm like, oh God, I
Oh.
don't even want to. I like that's just bad. That's just mean. Blah blah. And I'm like, I don't care about this part of it. It was one of the best sessions I've ever seen.
Mm.
He made accounting fun. And it was like because he was so passionate about it.
Yeah.
I mean, he engaged the audience. It was tremendous. So having passion for what you're doing is so important.
And that's such a great point because I know people that are starting to get on stages. That's one of the things. And I chuckle a little bit, but I've been there myself because
Mm-hmm.
they were like, "Hey, I want to get on stage." Okay, cool. Well, what do you want to talk about? I mean, just anything. I talk about anything, whatever, fitness, business, life, relationships, and like, okay, let's. I get it. I get it. Yes, you can
Yep.
talk about anything, but it's just like building a business. If you can service every single thing, nobody will come to you
Mm-hmm.
because they don't know how you can help them. Plus, they don't know if you're an expert in one of them or not. Because if you can do everything, that means that you probably do everything halfway.
That's right.
Nothing's ever that great. It's okay.
That's right. Did you ever see the movie Walk the Line?
I did.
Okay, remember the scene when Johnny Cash was playing the song? It was with his band. It was like very kind of boring. And I don't know if it was a record rep or whoever it was, but he's like, "You're telling me that's the song you're going to sing before God?" Like, and that's when it hit Johnny. Like, no, like he had his own magic. And I think
Mhm.
that's what you're talking about. People are like, I can talk about anything. Yeah, you can, but what is the thing you're supposed to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what moves you? Because if it moves you, it will move your audience.
Yeah.
And that's what people, I mean, I've heard some speakers that are technically perfect
Hmm.
and I can barely stay awake because they
Yeah.
don't care about their topic. And the other thing is care about your audience. Like if you care
Yeah.
about those two things, you're off to the races.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the technically perfect because that's one thing I feel like I stick out from other speaking coaches because I don't focus on all the ums and the ahs. And I always
No.
tell everybody if you're saying that every single sentence, okay, we're gonna work on that a little bit. But if it's just here and there, like I don't really care
No.
because your audience doesn't care. Your audience cares about the passion. They care about the
Mm-hmm.
information that you're bringing to them. An example I give is, and I can't even think of who this speaker was, but our coach, but they had some they were doing a podcast or whatever. We'll just call it a podcast. And the audio was just horrendous, but their information they always share is good. So I still listened through, even though the audio was terrible. Where somebody else who doesn't give great information that maybe I didn't care about as much, I'd be like, you know what? I'll just wait till next week, till the next one comes out. I'm not even going to listen to that. Or I may just completely tune them out. You know what? They don't have great audio. Psh, done. And
That's
so, of
right.
course, you want to make sure you have that good audio at all times for the podcast. But if your message is that good and people really crave to listen to it that much, it doesn't matter how technically great you are at speaking. Coming from
No,
a speaking coach, I know it seems counterintuitive, but it's so true. It's
it
about the
is.
passion, it's about the message, not the way
Mhm.
it's presented.
That's right. And here's the thing. If you make a mistake, who cares?
Yeah,
Do you know who Pepe Romero is? He's a famous guitarist.
that sounds familiar, but I'm not
Oh,
aware of him.
oh my God. My husband's a classical guitarist. So we went to see Pepe Romero and mind blowing. This guy, like I've heard all of his albums. He's amazing, world famous.
Mhm.
And he started playing a song and I'm like, that's not the way that song goes. And then he stopped himself and he's like, oh, goes, I made a mistake.
Huh.
And everyone laughed and we moved on. I mean, Philip, I cannot tell you how many times, like I've been in the middle of a presentation and I'll misspeak or I'll say, like, I'll get my words backwards. And I'm like, what am I talking about? And everyone laughs and we move on.
Yeah.
Humility is engaging.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not saying go make a bunch of mistakes so you can be humble about it, but if it does happen, just laugh about it because your audience is with you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So no matter what you're doing, where you're at, where you're going through, just be you. And that's going to be the best thing that you can do when it comes to speaking, when it comes to creating new possibilities in your life. Just be you. Take that imperfect action and show that passion. I feel like that's a way we could kind of sum up pretty much everything we've been talking about this whole episode.
I think it's
But
a great way of saying it. And it's funny you said the thing about be you. I used to do leadership work with high school students, and they'd always want my autograph at the end of the thing. And
mm,
I'd put be you, be great. Because that's
mm.
how we are great, is when we're ourselves and we're fully and authentically ourselves.
Yes, yes. Everybody likes a unique thing, not a copycat of
Mhm.
something else. And they'll figure out who you're copying at some point or
That's
another.
right.
But just be you.
That's right.
But Bobby,
Hmm.
this has been awesome. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. We've been going back and forth with all this banter. But I want to ask you one question, and that is if you could only share one message for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
If I could only share one message, it would be that no matter what your starting point is, you can change your future, right? We're not stuck with where we are. And we have that power to change it for ourselves. And a lot of times people think, well, I don't have all the answers right now. You don't have to. Get started because you can learn what you need to learn along the way. And you mentioned it. I've coached more than 3,000 people. I've seen that thousands of times. We just have to get started. That's all we have to do, but we can change our future.
You are exactly right. And I think about when we're going towards a destination. At first, maybe it's this sign and it looks just it's real small. You can barely see it. But if you keep going towards it, all of a sudden it starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally, all of a sudden you see what that sign is and you can read it. You can tell exactly what it is. But it's because you just kept taking one step closer and closer towards that all of a sudden it came to reality and you knew exactly what that was. And that's what we can do with our life, with business, with speaking, whatever it is. If we start taking one step, hopefully in the right direction, but we start taking one step, we can notice when maybe we're going off in the wrong direction and we can recorrect and keep going there. But it just takes one step at a time. I love that.
Yeah, one step. And here's the thing, even if it is in the wrong direction, guess what? You just learned. So it's as long as we're learning,
Mhm.
that's what it's all about.
Yeah, always be learning, right?
That's right.
So,
That's right.
well, Bobby, this has been a pleasure. I'm so glad we could get you on the podcast again. If people want to follow you, get to know you more, where can they go to reach out to you?
Best place is my website, which is just bobbykahler.com. And I have a newsletter there. And for anyone who signs up for the newsletter, they get a 5-day free email course on finding your forward fundamentals. So it's the fundamentals of how do I get started or not even get started, but how do I just find my next chapter, create my next chapter? And of course, you know this, I post a lot on LinkedIn as well, but those are the two best ways. And sorry about my dog Moose barking in the background.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, I just heard it a little bit, so it wasn't too big of a deal. I've definitely had worse situations on podcasts and heard it on other people's podcasts a lot worse. So
Oh
no
man,
big
he's
deal
a
there.
big dog, so
But
luckily
we can forgive you. You gave us a lot of great nuggets for us to take away, so we'll forgive you on this
Well,
flaw.
thank
Right?
you.
Imperfect action. So,
That's
guys,
right.
yeah, Bobbi. First of all, thank you so much again for being on the podcast. Guys, go out there, take some imperfect action, and be the best speaker that you can be.